the Talk Station is proud to present The War Files. The War Files, a selection of interviews honoring our warriors of the greatest generation, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam.
Your name?
Lorraine Maiden.
And where are you from?
Well, I'm originally from Kentucky, but I've been in several states.
Where in Kentucky?
I grew up in the coal mining section of Kentucky, but we were not your typical coal miners because both my parents were raised in a small Williamsburg, Kentucky, which has a college. And then when I was about 10 or 11, we moved to Richmond, Kentucky, which has a college. And when I was 15, I visited Cincinnati. So I'm not a typical coal miner's daughter like some others. However, I learned a lot growing up to see people, how they struggle and what their aims and ambitions are and how hard they try.
All right, we're talking about World War II. Where were you at the outbreak of World War II?
Well, when Pearl Harbor, I was a senior in high school, and I was in a little Kentucky settlement school because my family was moving, and I was a senior. And it happened, very suddenly, and suddenly I knew that I would probably never get a chance to date. Because all the boys would be gone to the Army or Navy. So.
What did your father do?
Well, he was a superintendent of coal mine. Okay. He was not well educated, but he went to University of Tennessee and Kentucky as an adult person and got certificates of mining engineering, and that got him a job pretty much anywhere he wanted to go. So,
you're a senior in high school. Pearl Harbor is invaded, and
my grandmother was there. So
your grandmother was in Pearl Harbor? In
Hawaii, yeah. I hardly knew her because she'd been gone a long time, but they came back on I think it's called an Armada, They all came back soon after Pearl Harbor was bombed. So.
All right. What was your reaction to the bombing of Pearl Harbor?
Oh, we were just horrified. We couldn't believe that something like that could happen. We thought we were the greatest country in the world. Japan's a little island, and we couldn't believe that they had the power to bring chaos to our country. After I got out of high school, you had to be 21 to join the Waves. You didn't to join the WWII, but you had to be 21.
Oh.
So I worked at that time my family lived in Williamsburg, Kentucky, the little college town, and I worked in various places, and when I got too bored, I would go to Louisville. That's where all the war places. I worked at Curtiss-Wright airplane plant for a few months. Dull, boring job.
What did you do at Curtiss-Wright?
I buffed. They called it a buffer. You just scrape off the sharp edges of aluminum parts, and it was. Can you imagine how boring that was? But the neat thing was, I saw all these midgets, and I couldn't imagine what they were doing there. And then I found out they were working in the wings of the airplane.
I did not realize that. So they actually sought out people of short stature
to do work in the wings of those planes.
What was going through your mind in the sense of you're joining the military?
I knew that there was a better world out there somewhere, and I wanted to see what it was all about. And so I thought. And every time I went to a movie, then we had what we call newsreels between movies. Every time a newsreel came on, I found myself crying. And, it was just such a chaotic thing that we had to have all of our young men over there dying. And we were doing nothing about it. We were doing not enough about it. So I thought, I'll join the Waves. And
all right, you had to be 21 to join the Waves.
But I joined when I was 20 because my parents signed for me. So I was joined in December, and I wasn't 20 until March.
All right, and you joined what year?
43.
And where did you go to boot camp?
Okay. Oh, that's so interesting. First we went to Cincinnati, and the Union Terminal had just been built, and it was the most fantastic building. And there we had trains coming in from every direction, and then we got on another train and went to New York City, and we were on the train long enough to pick out who we wanted to associate with. So we got to New York City, and I think it's Union Station is just across from Biltmore Hotel, I believe. And then we went to Hunter College, and that was the most fantastic boot camp. Imagine no barracks. We were in a famous elite women's college for our boot camp, so had a terrible sergeant. She thought she had to scream at us to make us hear, but we did just fine.
What was boot camp life like?
We just marched. I can't really remember much of anything else. We had some lectures and things like that, but I can't remember anything except just getting up and going to chow and marching.
What were your uniforms, and how did you come by them?
We had 3 uniforms. We had a navy blue one, suit, and then we had a striped one, which was seersucker, a summer thing.
Right.
And then we had this blue smock that it had 4 layers that folded over when you buttoned it. And I'll tell you later why that was so important, but at boot camp, we only wore the seersucker and the navy blue suit.
December 43, you joined the Navy Waves. Your decision to join was just your decision.
Yeah, it was from all those movies, and where I worked at Walgreens restaurant in Louisville, and it was close to Fort Knox, and those poor soldiers came in every weekend, and most of them were rural boys out for the first time in their lives, and that's what I was too. And so I saw all of that, and I knew they were going to war, and it was very painful to see that happen.
Looking back at that experience and the desire, what was your attitude? Were you angry?
I think I was just trying to figure out life. It was I had a very restricted upbringing, and here was all of this tremendous things happening that I didn't quite understand. I was just trying to figure out what it was all about.
All right, you were at Hunter's College in New York.
Yeah.
And how long were you in boot camp?
Just 6 weeks, and the snow was waist deep. I was in a swimming class, and we didn't have time to dry my hair. I took a most terrible cold, which is going to be brought up again later on, and I could never dry my hair, and I had this horrible cold and a lot of allergies when I went in, so that is going to lead to some real problems for me.
All right. After Hunter's College and boot camp, where did you go?
Well, I went to Bethesda, Maryland I wanted to tell you, we went we had only one leave the day before we left in New York, and this one friend who had a rich boyfriend took 6 of us to the Biltmore Hotel for dinner, and of course that was a great experience for us little rural girls. One was from Kansas and and I was from Kentucky, and it was just really fantastic. So, and then we went to Bethesda, and there we had more freedom. We was only there 2 weeks, I believe. We learned to make a taut bed, and we learned to give oranges shots.
Okay. So you were getting a medical training. Now, did you made friends while you were at Hunter's College at boot camp? Did they go with you to?
No, none of them went. We all separated, so none of us went to the same place. So.
Have you kept up with any of your boot camp?
No,
members?
I didn't, because it just never occurred to me, and everything was so hyper, so.
All right, so you're 2 weeks in Bethesda after boot camp. Then where do you go?
Well, first in Bethesda, I got to see, now in New York, I got to see New York City, but in Bethesda, I got to see the Smithsonian Institute, which was a great thrill. And then I went to, I got on the train and went to Charleston, South Carolina. I had never in my wildest dreams ever thought I would get to see the ocean. And there I was. And 2 weeks after I left waist-high snow, I went to this subtropical climate. And I was sick before too long from a change in the climate. But anyway, we went to the hospital, and it was, I just felt like I had been cut out to be a nurse. I really did. It was just, I'd had such compassion for hurting people, and I felt like I had been hurt some, and it was just the thing I needed to do.
I want to go back to your nurse here for a moment. Was that something you wanted to do? Did you select it, or did the Navy select it for you?
Well, it was my first choice.
Okay.
As nurses' aides, I didn't tell you that in Bethesda we learned to read prescriptions. I had no idea we filled prescriptions and gave penicillin shots and did all of that. And on one ward, when I was on the men's ward, we had a visitor, Helen Keller, and her friend came to our ward. See, I had so many great things happen.
This was in Bethesda or in Charleston?
No, we're back in Charleston.
Helen Keller visited the ward?
Yes, she visited 6 wards, and ours was one of them. And it was after her friend Ann Sutherland died, and she had that new woman with her. But it was just I had read about her and studied her book, read her books and studied her, and that was a great thing that happened. And then I was transferred to the maternity ward.
All right, let me ask you back to Charleston. It's a naval hospital. You're a seaman at this point.
Yeah.
Where were you living in Charleston?
Okay, we had a barracks. It was a women's barracks, just a few steps from the hospital.
Okay.
We had a big common room. Some of the girls played the piano, some sang. It was a way we got together when we weren't working. But our working hours, one week we worked 70-some hours, 76, I think, and no leave. The next week we worked 63 or 4, and we got Saturday afternoon and Sunday off. That was every 2 weeks we had leave.
Wow.
And I wondered why our hours were so long, but in all that time I never heard anybody complain about the work. We were all dedicated. As far as I know, we were all dedicated.
Who were the patients?
They were the Navy and Marine people that came right off the battlefield. Returning warriors, some of them came from California even. So I don't know why they shipped them across the country, but they did. Some of them had very serious wounds, and we dressed their wounds. We had the doctor came to the ward every day, and the nurse came. She just supervised, but and she's the one who talked to the doctor. But we had some that were in drastic condition, and then they had our meals served in the ward. And then we had a lot of dishes to wash. And that's it. Charleston, was subtropical. That was the summer. And there were days when the only dry spot on me were my shoulder blades and those 2 lapels.
So you had to wear that smock when you were in the...
we wore the smock when we were in the hospital, yeah.
What was the response and the communications to these returning warriors, the injured soldiers and sailors and Marines?
Well, we treated them like brothers, really.
That's what I wondered. Yeah,
that's right. And we had some close relationships. Of course, some people dated, but I think maybe I had 1 or 2 dates the whole time I was there. So, and it was just like if you see somebody hurt, you want to help them.
Right.
And I was in the right place. At that time, nurses had to sign a paper they would not get married for 2 years. That was the nurses' training. And I wanted to get married and have children, so I wouldn't sign that. I wouldn't be a nurse for that reason. And sometimes I've regretted that.
So that you were not really a nurse.
I was not really a nurse.
But you were doing many of the nursing activities.
We did all of them. All she did was make our schedule and supervise with the doctor.
All right. Now, you end up retiring as a seaman first class. So I want to find out how you made it through the ranks from seaman apprentice to all the way to first class. But how long did you stay in Charleston?
From February to November.
Of 44.
And you know, I left that way of snow up to my waist, and when I got to Charleston in February, they had jonquils in bloom.
Right.
It was just such a great thrill. And then we went to Folly Beach and Olive Palms and enjoyed the ocean. But you know, we had very little time to enjoy anything. And after about 4 or 5 months, about 6 months of that, I was so overcome with bronchial asthma from that change, the wet head and the snow and the tropical climate. And so I started getting sick, and I never realized I was sick, but one day the nurse said, "You're going to have to quit running around so much." And I said, "I haven't been on leave in 6 or 8 weeks," and then she put me in the hospital. And in about 6 or 8 weeks, I was medically discharged. So.
Oh, you were?
Yeah. But during that time, we had a German prisoner of war, and they chose me to dress his cut finger. I was so confused, I thought I should be mad, and I wouldn't look him in the eye, but I did dress his wound. And then when I was on the maternity ward, we had a black master sergeant. I told my group this. We had a black master sergeant, and you know that was before equal rights. Mm-hmm. And they couldn't figure out where to put his wife. It was their first baby, and they found a closet on the ward. And they took out all the boxes, no windows or anything, and put a bed in there, and they put me in to take care of her. So I was really flattered. I knew some of them were prejudiced, but I thought that showed something good about me, or it was a pure insult one.
No, I think it's interesting, and you know, there's something we need to realize, even this day and age, that it was just yesterday that, one, we had the war, but two, we finally comprehended the concept of integration, that black and white meant nothing. And
then when he came to visit her, it seemed like they kind of rushed her in. She was a beautiful woman, well educated, much better educated than I was. And I was just very upset about that. So you were medically discharged because of bronchial asthma, yeah. When did that discharge occur? It was in November of 44. Okay, so you'd only been in practically a year. 11, over 11 months, yeah. And I was so upset about it because, see, I was going to stay until the war, and during that time, President Roosevelt died too. So, what was it like when you left the Navy? What was the mood, not only of the Navy but of the country at the time? Well, it was a prolonged war. I mean, right. I think everybody thought it would be over by then. Really? But it wasn't, see, and we still had injured men coming in, and it was a stressful time, really, so. Back to your parents and also to your friends that were not in the service. What did they think of the fact that you joined the Navy? Well, I think that they were proud of me. My mother had 3 stars in her window. Oh, really? I had 2 brothers in the Army, and one was taken prisoner for about 3 months, and the other was in the that battle on the Rhine that's so popular, so important. And so I think they were proud of me, but I didn't have any real friends there because, see, I'd gone to high school in another place, and it was my family's home, but it was not really my home. So, how did that resonate when people met you and discovered that you had formerly served in the military? I mean, women in the military at that time was pretty much an anomaly. It was, yeah, but it was not well received at all. you know, a lot of people, I had people think the maternity ward was for the waves. You know, people were suspicious of women in the service. So, see, that was a drawback. And then I think that's why we didn't get any publicity when we got out. I did go to business college under the GI Bill of Rights.
Okay.
So
What did you end up doing?
I ended up going to business college, and I worked until I got married at 26, and I worked for him 13 years. You can leave off some of this
that's
if
fine.
you want to.
We will.
12 years in his office. I ran his office for 12 years. I did not get paid anything.
And what did your husband do?
We had a roofing and siding company
Okay. Where?
in Asheville.
Okay.
And then I had 3 children, and he decided he would leave. He found somebody younger than me, so
So you raised the children yourself?
I raised it. But I put myself through college too. At that time, Asheville Biltmore was going into the university, and they had a transitional educational program that was 3 years. And I wanted the summer. I didn't really care about education, but I do now.
Right.
But I wanted the summers off and the holidays to be with my children. Unfortunately, I never made enough money to quit working because who wanted to hire a 44-year-old woman teaching her first few years of school? So that was kind of a bad disaster. So I know I was a really good teacher because education does mean so much to me.
So you ended up being a teacher?
I taught 7 years. And then when my son graduated from high school, and I was spending every moment, weekends, grading papers, making lesson plans, in the only bad school I ever taught in, and I decided I would quit. So I worked for a couple of years, and I found out I was pretty good upholsterer, so I borrowed $2,000, that's all I could borrow, and went into business for myself. So, see, my daddy was kind of a businessman, my husband was, and
How long were you in the upholstery business?
15 years until I was 70 years old.
Where was this that you did this?
That was in Cincinnati.
Okay, so you went back to Cincinnati.
Yeah, when I was 15, I said, this is the city of my choice. And as soon as I taught 2 years in Siler City for less than $6,000 a year, and me with 3 children, I decided I would go back to Cincinnati. And I thought I could get a job in the city, but I didn't. So,
When did you move to Carteret County?
well, I came here 99.
What brought you here?
Well, I had a daughter living here then, and my grandson, he had a little trouble with drugs. So I came to be a big help to them.
Good.
And as soon as the situation got settled, she went back to Oregon and left me here. So, but I joined the Writers Club, and I'm pretty well known for my letters to the editors. A Christian political activist. I'm very devoutly a Christian, and if anybody doesn't like it, they can write their own letters.
Lorraine, thank you very much for doing this. This is fabulous.
Well, I thank you so much for letting me. I love to have these things known. See.
Well, you know, it's interesting. So few think about the women in the war.
Well, they were treated pretty badly.
How so?
Well, the people back home, they thought, the first time I went to church after I got back home, he preached about women not staying in the home. You know, about women leaving the home. They'd done something terrible. So,
you know, it's interesting. Have you been to the World War II monument?
No, but I'm going on May the 4th. Yeah.
After the war, of course, you got married, raised children. Did you ever think back about the war? Was there much?
Oh, yes. I thought a lot about it. You know, those things so many things I've never been able to forget. See, that's why I write. It's just a part of me, and I can't forget it, and I don't want to forget it, and that's why I love my country so much. I would do anything to get rid of Congress.
Well, no, it's interesting. I've talked about this with other World War II veterans. The return from what was probably the greatest military conflict in the history of the country.
Right.
They returned, they put their uniforms and their medals and apparently even their memories in the trunk or the bureau drawer, and they went about their business to make this country. And not until 2004, after the Korean Monument being constructed, the Vietnam Memorial, not until 2004 do we have a World War II memorial. And I just wonder, what was it about World War II participants, veterans?
I think that we were just so dedicated to saving our nation and freedom, and it was not that big a deal. Like they just did what they were supposed to do, and the lesser wars, except for the Vietnam, that was something kind of spectacular. Well, we have a different culture. See, every 40 or 50 years, we have a different culture.
New generation, new culture.
Yeah. And now you take the Vietnam War, they were treated just about like the World War II because it was not a popular war. World War II was a popular war, but it was just the people doing our duty. It was not something we volunteered for. It was what we were supposed to do. And now I really do believe that we have been punished by our government. They took to the Notch group, which is 10% of our Social Security. You know that the time, and now they've taken our COLA raises, and then they're spending this tremendous amount of money to build a monument to us. Now, to me, that doesn't make sense.
Well, but much of that monument was built by private funding, but it's fascinating that it took
all those years.
All those years.
Yeah. Well, maybe it was just that all these monument ideas came out after the wars were over.
It's interesting. Well, it's just interesting that it took so long. Thank you very much, Lorraine. I appreciate that. Thank you, Lorraine Maiden.
You've been listening to The War Files, a selection of interviews honoring our warriors of the greatest generation, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. The War Files is a TalkStation presentation.